Hey everybody, welcome to Truth Be Told. Thanks very much for listening in. I really appreciate your time, and I'm excited about this episode. It's a topic that I've been thinking about for a little while, and I don't really have like the greatest wrap up to it. It kind of is left open for discussion, but I hope you find that interesting anyways, and maybe we can start some discussion in the comments. That'd be cool. But this is a message that I actually gave for church last week, and typically when I do that, I'll pull the audio from the soundboard at church, and I'll upload it as just an audio-only podcast on like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, wherever you stream a podcast at, I'll upload it there as either like an extra episode or an alternate to that week's YouTube episode. And I don't pull the video to post on YouTube because like I'm in a suit and it's in a church hall and just doesn't like fit the brand of Truth Be Told necessarily. But this one, I was like, I love this topic. I love this idea, and I think it'd make a great YouTube episode as well as podcast. So I thought I'd share it. Also, incidentally, I don't think I delivered it super well at church, and I kind of wanted a do-over. I don't know. I'm not sure what it was. I walked away after church, and I thought that wasn't my best work, even though the topic is one I'm definitely very intrigued by and very interested in. So hopefully you find that to be the case. It'll be interesting to be using my church notes to deliver a podcast just because I guess it's not that different. I normally do use some notes, but I don't know. Just the way I write my notes for church is very different than I would for Truth Be Told. So we'll see if it's any different. But to jump right in, a few weeks ago, I've been like reading through the Bible little by little and trying my best to not engage in like deep study every single time, but just read and see what I pick up, see where life is like highlighting things for me. Because sometimes, that happens. You read through and a year later you read through again and you're in a different place in life, so you notice different things. So I've been trying to do that. Every once in a while I still get waylaid by a little like, what is that word and what does that mean? And I'll take 20 minutes on one verse where I probably should just keep reading and see what it means in the whole of the context. But I just got rereading Genesis, and I love Genesis. It's one of my favorite books in the whole Bible. But every time I read through, one thing my mind sticks on is the character of Jacob. I just really find him interesting and relatable. To me, I think he reads like a real person. He is largely imperfect. He struggles to connect with God despite his family history. Many times he says about God, like the God of my fathers or the God of Abraham and Isaac, or like your God, but he doesn't ever say like his God until later on in his life. Like he kind of switches back and forth. Even though he's talking to God, he knows him, recognizes his power. It's like he's keeping God at arm's length for a lot of his life until at some point he's like, okay, my God. And I think that's really interesting. And he also just makes bad decisions like constantly, and they're not as poetic as some other characters' bad decisions. Like, many people in the Bible are imperfect. I appreciate that about the Bible, that it's honest and authentic about who people are, so that even the heroes of the faith are not perfect people, but sometimes those characters can read a little bit poetic. Like their mistakes are placed so perfectly that like you almost forget that it's not like a storybook telling of like a character arc. And I do think the authors took some license in writing the story in those ways, even though they're still, I believe, factually true. But in Jacob's story, it's like some of his decisions are just, they're not poetic. They're not pretty. They're just kind of skeevy and weird. And I don't know, there's something about him that is just like, what is going on with you, man? Like, you're just not a great guy sometimes. Your decisions are very questionable, but the thing that I love is that it's very evident throughout his story that God does still love him and have a plan and purpose for him, and he works with him and is patient with him. And I guess in reading Jacob and relating to his imperfection, I have hope that God also feels that way about me, even when I don't feel like I have purpose, or I don't feel like God's working with me, or I don't know how God could love me. Like, I read Jacob and I'm like, okay, like he still did. And that's hopeful for me. So I like the story of Jacob for those reasons. But on this read through of his life, I noticed a pattern that I hadn't ever noticed before. And I'd like to share that with you today. but I think it's going to take a little bit of a refresher on his character, which I've already kind of slandered him enough, but I want to just kind of highlight some things about Jacob's character that I think will make this pattern very evident to you. Jacob begins his life as a very shady individual. And I mean, he begins his life like everybody, like a baby, right? But the author of Genesis is so concerned with letting us know that Jacob is this shady character that even from his birth, we're told this story that kind of like makes him out to be this slightly less than favorable individual. I think the author is intentionally highlighting these things, not because they're not, it's not like he's making them up. It's just the things the author chooses to focus on are like, yeah, this guy, there's going to be some problems with this guy. Keep your eye on these behaviors because they're going to keep on going. He's born grasping the heel of his brother Esau. And like the imagery is like he's tripping him up or like pulling him back to get ahead. And sure enough, that's what he does later. He acts to deceive his father Isaac by disguising himself, hiding his identity, and pretending to be Esau in order to steal his blessing from him. And so the way that he even goes about doing some of these things is not direct conflict. It's not outright lies. It's through deception and cunning, and it doesn't read like a main figure of God's chosen people that he's going to work with. It reads as almost like a seed of the serpent, right? Where it's like he's asking these questions that cause people to doubt, or he's behaving in ways that cause people to doubt. He's just a little slimy. And then after he does this, he flees. He runs because he's like, I'm afraid my brother's going to kill me. Maybe a little bit of shame. Like, how do you face your family after you just did this? I think if you're looking to deceive your father and then live in the same house with your brother and father who you tricked, and I think it was part of Jacob's plan all along. Like, he was going to get out of there. He wasn't going to stick around once he had what he wanted. And this is just kind of underhanded. This is how Jacob operates. Jacob is consistently hiding or deceiving or running or eluding or tricking, and he's never engaged in face-to-face conflict. He's always finding ways around, like elaborate ways around conflict in order to get what he wants. And this is where the pattern comes in. I think once we know this about Jacob's character, we start to see this pattern form in his life. In Genesis 32, which is the first plot point of the pattern, Jacob has been away from home for a long time, and he has been working for Laban, who's a family member. He has married Laban's daughters, Rachel and Leah. He's had some conflict with Laban that went kind of weird, and now he's leaving. In the dead of night, he's getting out of there. He's not dealing with Laban anymore. So even though he's got conflict back home, the conflict with Laban, he's also going to choose to run from. He's choosing between conflicts right now, and he's like, okay, I don't want to face the one that I'm in now, so I'm going to leave, and hopefully the one that I left has died down. It's not like some noble choice to return to his family and face the consequences of his bad decisions. It's like, this is uncomfortable, this isn't going well, we got to get out of here. So he takes his flocks and his herds, he takes his wives and his kids and his servants, everything that he's built, he's become very prosperous, and he leaves. And he sends his family and his kind of group over the river, and he's the last person to cross over. But before he does, God stops him and wrestles with him all night. And this is such a unique story. I mean, we see God appearing in the Old Testament. We see God interacting with people in really interesting and miraculous ways. But this visceral, physical contact between a person, we just don't see with anybody except for Jacob. And Jacob responds by not letting go. Like, he is going to strive with this person. He's not going to lose, even if he's not going to win. It's like, I'm taking you down with me. And in this wrestling, God renames him Israel. And he says, for he has striven with God and with men and has prevailed. And in verse 30, after he gets renamed, Jacob is going to do some renaming as well. It says, Jacob called the name of the place where he wrestled with God Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. Peniel refers to the Hebrew name for face, and El refers to God, so face of God is kind of what this place is named. But I want to take a moment to notice what's happening here, this revelation that Jacob has. He has spent his entire life in silent deception, in running from conflict, and he has been forced into face-to-face conflict with God, who he's run from and kept at arm's length his whole life. He's been forced to face the thing he's been running from, or the person that he's been running from. And for most of us, the idea of being face-to-face with God in this way carries some trepidation. Like, it's at one time the chief Christian goal to be at one with God, to dwell with him, to have him return to the earth, and to have him be our God and we are his people. We want that union again. But also there's a part of us that's like a little afraid of that reality because it's God and we realize our own imperfection in light of his perfection. We know that Jesus died for our sins. We have reconciliation with God. But on a human, physical, concern for our lives level, I do think there is an awe and a fear of God that if we were told tomorrow you're going to wrestle with the Lord, it'd be like, oh, okay. That would frighten us to a degree because he can see every flaw. He knows every weakness. He knows every ounce of us that is not as it should be or not as it could be. He has every practical reason, aside from reconciliation with Jesus Christ, to turn away from us, to have nothing to do with us. And we have every reason to crumple under the weight of his perfection. Like, we know that he loves us and he looks on us gently and he's merciful to us. We know this, but logically speaking, this relationship with God is not one that we have, we can appear boldly before the throne of grace. Christ has done an amazing thing in reconciling us to the Father, and yet by our own merit, in and of ourselves, we are wholly unworthy to stand before him in light of our own sinfulness. And so I do think there's a level of like, wow, his perfection just completely outshines my imperfection in a way that frightens me. C.S. Lewis talks about the return of Christ, and he says that anybody who thinks on that time that's just going to be like easy and only pleasant is just playing at religion, because we will be face to face with perfection for the first time, and our own imperfection will be the clearest it's ever been, mirrored back to us in light of his perfection. And that's a scary thing at the same time as being what we hope for, the greatest longing that we have. It is still weighty. But Jacob realizes that in this moment where he's been face to face with God, driven into direct conflict with him, it was through that circumstance that he was actually able to realize God's grace. If we don't come before God with our sins and say, okay, God, like, look at me, if he doesn't look at us and see our sins and, they're just hidden from him in some way, if we can truly run from God, which we can't do, but if we could truly do that, then we're never going to see his mercy. We're never going to see his grace. It's in him seeing us fully and knowing us fully and then choosing to love us fully that we have the greatest picture of God's grace. And Jacob sees this. He sees that he's finally able in some way to rid himself of his fears, finally able to start claiming God as his own God, that he could finally start living rather than just running and surviving. And he has this realization here where he says, I've seen God face to face, and yet I've been delivered, and yet I'm alive, yet I've been spared, yet I've seen mercy. And this is the first plot point of this pattern. Obviously, we haven't seen the pattern yet because this is the first one. You got to have a few more points on the graph in order to be like, oh, look at that. Look what just happened. But it does continue just a few verses later when he continues home. Even though he's had this moment with God that's transformed him in some way, he still is very fearful of meeting his brother Esau, who he wronged, the man that he cheated, the potentially hot-tempered hunter of a brother who marches to the beat of his own drum. He doesn't really want to face this guy, and so he sends gifts ahead of him. He's like, okay, let's play this cool. We're going to send gifts. We're going to go cowering with our eyes to the earth, and hopefully he's not going to get angry and kill me. And I think it's so funny, this this posturing that Jacob does before Esau is like, even when he sees him, he bows to the ground 7 times, like a long way off. And it's almost like it reminds me of like a chihuahua a little bit, where you see them like barking at dogs like 50 times their size. They could just rip them to pieces, but there's this fierceness in this little chihuahua that's just like bark, 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 bark. But the second a dog actually turns and like addresses the barking, the chihuahua's just like, nope, never mind. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. And like turns on its belly. Like that's kind of what I see Jacob doing. This posturing of just like, I give up. I'm surrendering. I'm sorry if you're mad. Please don't be. Take what you want, but don't kill me. That's kind of what I'm seeing. But surprisingly, Esau runs out to meet him, gives him a hug, tells him that the gifts he's sent are unnecessary, tells him that he has nothing to fear from him in the slightest. And this is in Genesis 33, verses 9. I'm going to read to verse 10. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. But notice Jacob's response. But Jacob said, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. So there's something about that moment he had with God that he sees paralleled in this interaction with Esau. I've seen your face, and yet you've accepted me. Yet you've had mercy. Yet I'm alive where I thought I'd be dead. Again, Jacob, who has hidden his identity and run in order to deceive and get away with what he wants, is now fully exposed. He is now seeing someone face to face and living where he expected that conflict to end in his death. And I think this interaction is so cool because it shows that the experience he had with God, as terrifying as it might have been, has had a profound impact on Jacob. Even though, yes, right after this, he's met with God and lived, but he's afraid Esau is going to kill him. It's like, man, if you can meet with God and live, you can meet with your brother and live. So yes, he's still living in a little bit of that fear, but he's able to allow that experience with God to impact how he receives the mercy from Jacob. He experienced mercy from God, love from God, and now he sees echoes of that experience, even with an enemy, even in his most troubling of circumstances. And so in this plot point, the pattern continues, but Jacob has one more face to see. And I think this one completes the pattern, shows us the intentionality of the author, but it also changes it just slightly. And that's where we can learn a lot. Towards the end of Jacob's life, he's lived through a lot. He has lived through disputes among his family. He's lived through the perceived death of Joseph. He has lived through famines in his land, the back and forth of the brothers to Egypt, and then even finally being willing to let Benjamin go with them so that the whole family doesn't starve. So he's kind of given up his, he still holds Benjamin in high regard, but willing to let the younger son go in order that the whole family might be spared. So maybe some of his favoritism is easing. He maybe sees some of the problems that had, or the effects of the problem that had on Joseph's life. And so he's lived through a lot. And then he's told towards the end of his life, actually, Joseph is alive and he's ruling in Egypt. And I think this is so amazing. I think it's really cool. Joseph's story is one of my favorite Old Testament ones because it, in so many ways, mirrors the story of Jesus. He is rejected by his brothers. He is betrayed and sold. He's left for dead. The next time they see him, very unexpectedly, truly thinking that he's dead, he's alive, and he's king over Gentiles. So not only living, but reigning in a position to save them that they never expected. And to me, that is just a beautiful image of Jesus, right? The Israelites always expected Messiah, and then when he gets sent to them and he shows up, they reject him, they betray him, they leave him for dead. But the next time they see him, when he comes back, not only will he be alive, he's going to be king over me, a non-Israelite grafted in. And I think that'll be very surprising, but I think it's really cool to see that parallel. But Jacob and Joseph have this amazing reunion where Jacob gets brought to Egypt. He's going to be protected by Joseph, provided for by Joseph. And in Genesis 46, verse 30, it says, Israel said to Joseph, I think it's interesting that there's a callback to his name, that God named him, potentially another indicator that the author is trying to kind of, hey, we've been calling this guy Jacob, but he is renamed Israel. Remember that time where he got renamed? And you kind of start the process. But it says, Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive. That is so amazing. Jacob says to God, I've seen your face and lived. Jacob says to Esau, I've seen your face and am accepted. I've had mercy. I'm alive. Then Jacob says to Joseph, I've seen your face. I can die peacefully now. There is something, I believe, very significant going on here, and I think the author is really intentionally drawing our attention to these three accounts, but I can't really say exactly what we're supposed to draw from it. I think there's a lot of things in here, a lot of parallels in this pattern, but we need to ask, what did this unfolding pattern mean for Jacob? What does it tell us about his growth? How did he perceive this moment? Or rather, these moments? And what does it say to us? What can we draw out of it? I think we need to be careful in not saying, well, that means something to us apart from what it meant to Jacob. We need to understand what it might have meant to him so that it can mean something to us. But we do need to ask, what can we draw from this story? Does it represent maybe a pattern in God's overall plan? Maybe it represents something in our individual Christian lives. Maybe it's all of these things. I don't know. But one thing that I've landed on that I do believe is here, this is kind of where the discussion comes in, but one thing that I believe is being painted here is that with God, Jacob expects to be completely undone, but instead he finds mercy and he survives. With Esau, he expects judgment, he expects death, but he finds instead reconciliation and, again, prolonged life. With Joseph, he expects loss. He doesn't expect to see his son again, but instead he finds restoration and he finds joy that he thought was long gone. The face that he once avoided becomes this place where he discovers grace more and more fully as his life keeps going. It's not just, oh, good, I didn't die. Oh, good, I didn't die. It's, oh, man, my son is alive. Like this fullness of joy that he experienced, this fuller life that he never thought possible. Every place that he fears and expects death, he finds fuller life. And I think it's in that fuller life that he finally is able to release his grip on merely surviving. He's been surviving his whole life through deception, manipulation, through running. It's all been about survival, about preservation of his life. But he's given up that stranglehold on survival in order to find fuller life. Reconciliation with his brother, a God that loves him and leads him, a son that's been restored to him. He finds these things once he's able to confront the God who he expects to kill him, the brother who he expects to kill him, the son who he expects is dead. He finds fuller life. And I think that's one thing we can take away from this. So often we want to preserve ourselves, and in doing so we run from conflict, not realizing that it's in that conflict that we'll actually see the most grace. It's through that conflict that we'll actually experience the most freedom. And it's beyond that conflict that we actually have fuller life. This reminds me of that verse where Jesus says, he who loses his life for my sake will find it. It's like, well, if you lose your life, how do you find it? How do you gain it? And it's like a giving up of yourself in order to accept what God is extending to you. That's a scary thing because we don't know always what that's going to look like, be like, feel like. What's he going to call us through? What difficulty might we have? We don't know. But once we give up the desire for survival and accept his offer of life, the peace that we have, the fulfillment that we have, the joy that we have that we never thought possible finally shows up. And I think that's what Jacob experiences, and that's one thing that I take away from this awesome story and this really cool pattern. So let me know down below what you found from this story, what lessons you might take away from it, maybe something in your own personal life that you see mirrored in this pattern. Even on Spotify, feel free to comment. People think the commenting is just for YouTube. So if you're listening on the audio platform, you think, well, I can't really do that. But no, on most audio platforms, they've left room now where you can comment. So join the discussion, and I look forward to talking with you about this stuff. It's really cool. Have a good one, guys.